Good afternoon to you. It is 3:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, we talk guns and the Biden administration's effort to go after them. Mark Smith is here from the Four Boxes Diner YouTube channel. We talk to him at 3:30. George Hill joins us at 4 o'clock. He's an FBI whistleblower. He'll discuss today's big FISA vote in the United States Congress. David Strom joins us from Hot Air at 4:30. The governor of North Dakota, Doug Burgum, is here because he will be here in Virginia this weekend. He'll tell us why. I'll just give you a little tease. He's supporting Trump. And Daniel Turner joins us at 5:30. Joe Biden making a decision to raise gas prices during an election year. That's a head scratcher. We'll discuss it with Daniel Turner, and we'll talk to you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A happy Friday to you. All week long, we've been talking about this FISA debate. The deadline coming up next week, although our expert guests have been reminding us that those powers would continue throughout the rest of the year, regardless of the actual congressional vote over this week and a half or so. But basically, Congress was debating to what extent should they renew the spying powers of the federal government found in Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And over the years, the courts and the government itself has identified hundreds of thousands of violations of the civil liberties of Americans with the government spying on them without actually obtaining a warrant to do it, as is their constitutional obligation. They're not doing that. And so Congress was called upon this week to impose a law, another barrier. So on top of the Constitution itself, a law requiring a warrant before you can surveil an American. They deserve some due process here. And that came up today in the form of an amendment to this FISA renewal presented by a routine guest here on this program, Congressman Andy Biggs. Congressman Biggs presents that amendment. And I have to say, I was watching C-SPAN earlier. It was almost like a sporting event. I'm staring at the vote totals, and the votes for the Andy Biggs amendment for much of the vote today were trailing by 10, 15, 20 votes. But as we're nearing the end, all of the votes start coming in, and this thing is suddenly a nail-biter. And it ends at a split vote, 212 to 212. 212 to 212. There were a majority of the Republicans did support it, a majority, but the parties were very split. This is not the kind of thing where we're just saying, oh, it was a partisan vote. The parties were very split. Majority of Democrats want to continue spying on Americans, I should point out. But still, there was a sizable chunk of Democrats who came in and supported adding a warrant requirement. But because it was a tie, 212 to 212, the amendment failed. And the reason it became a tie, House Speaker Mike Johnson voted against the warrant requirement. The House Speaker, the man who at one point claimed that he was concerned about all of the abuses by our government, has now been consumed by the establishment. It's a disappointing feature of today's news that Speaker Johnson is on the side of allowing more warrantless surveillance of Americans. He described his transformation on this subject this week. He said he did originally think that there were all sorts of abuses against Americans, but once he got behind closed doors for a secret briefing with the intelligence community, everything changed. Take a listen to Mike Johnson explaining why he's suddenly for more government power.
When I was a member of the judiciary, I saw all the abuses of the FBI, the terrible abuses over and over and over, the hundreds of thousands of abuses. And then when I became Speaker, I went to the SCIF and got the confidential briefing from sort of the other perspective on that to understand the necessity of Section 702 of FISA and how important it is for national security. And it gave me a different perspective. So I encourage all the members to go to the classified briefing and hear all that and see it so they can evaluate the situation for themselves. And I think some opinions have changed both ways, but that's part of the process. You got to be fully informed.
Have you been Excuse me. And that's it. They shuffle him off. But you hear the beginning of that? He's like, when I was just a member, a regular old rank-and-file member of Congress, I saw hundreds of thousands of abuses, and I said, that shouldn't happen. And then when I became Speaker, they pulled me behind closed doors, gave me a secret briefing. I can't tell you the details. Sorry, you're just the American people. And now I have to support not having a warrant as a barrier to spying on you. Does that pass the smell test for you? Doesn't for me. I heard that and I thought, what? I can't even believe those words came out of your mouth. That's insane. Oh, the skiff told you? You got into the skiff and they told you, now we have to spy on Americans without warrants? So that's where we are. Mike Lee, the senator, was on the floor today during the House vote. And he's been great on this. And he was trying to, I think, whip votes today to make sure people imposed a warrant requirement. And ahead of the vote, he said, tell your congressmen and women, don't vote to reauthorize FISA 702 unless the Biggs amendment requiring a warrant passes. Hashtag get a warrant, says Mike Lee. Get a warrant. So there he was on the House floor today during the vote supporting the lawmakers who were supporting a warrant requirement. But it didn't come to pass. Here's the audio, 212 to 212 today, as these members, the vote fails to impose that warrant requirement.
On this vote, the yeas are 212, the nays are 212. The amendment is not adopted.
The amendment is not adopted. The bill itself, after a series of amendment votes today, did eventually pass 273 to 147. 126 Republicans, 147 Democrats supporting this. More Democrats than Republicans supporting the renewal of this government spying power today, just to give you a sense of how this is going and what the parties represent.
On this vote, the yeas are 273, the nays are 147. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Congressman Tim Burchett recorded a video today, posted it to the internet, saying this is a sad day for the country.
Hey everybody, Tim Burchett, just leaving the House floor. Not a good day for democracy. FISA has passed currently through the House. The amendment that would have stopped warrantless searches on Americans, I get what you're saying, warrantless searches on Americans, it did not pass. So warrantless searches will continue. And it's not really good, folks. I was told by the State Department that those that warrants were problematic. Well, I got news for you. The Constitution is problematic to the State Department and the intelligence community,
yes.
The FBI, and the rest of them.
That's the point. The Constitution is supposed to be a barrier to the government. That's exactly the point. The White House undertook, I'll play more Tim Burchett in a moment, but just to emphasize his point here, the White House undertook an extensive hand-wringing effort today. They were going after everybody on Capitol Hill, trying to get them to support the renewal of FISA without any warrant requirements whatsoever. Nancy Pelosi and her dentures were babbling on the House floor today about how the American people can still be spied upon. She claimed she joined Congress and the House Intel Committee all those years ago because she wanted to defend civil liberties. So that's why she's supporting the continued spying on American citizens without warrants. Yes, it's incoherent. It's totally incoherent. Tim Burchett continues.
Should be. They should not be able to do searches on you electronically or otherwise without due legal process, not without going before a judge. It's a very sad day. We've allowed the intelligence community to run Capitol Hill, and once again the Uniparty has collected all their folks in and won, and that's why these elections are so important. Dadgummit, I don't care if you go to church with a member or you're in your Sunday school class, you play golf with them. Look, if they come down here and vote to take away your constitutional rights, why in the world would you all keep electing them? Either party. So thank y'all for sending me here. We'll keep fighting.
All right. So that's his assessment of the events on the floor today. Again, FISA renewal in place. Now, let me just point out how long. The renewal is not for the length of time that they were hoping for. They wanted to go for many years. 2 years is where we are. Matt Gaetz was saying today that to the extent that there's anything good about this, that gives Donald Trump, as the future president of the United States, the opportunity to kill this thing 2 years from now. And that's an optimistic take on all of this, kind of the silver lining. One other piece here that's worth emphasizing just for a moment, just based on what could happen. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna apparently raised a little used maneuver in the wake of the passage of this bill that actually puts the brakes on the bill being sent to the Senate right away. There are a few people who can explain it better than Fox News' Chad Pergram, so I'll let him do the explanation. Here he is.
Pergram's on Capitol Hill with the latest. So now it heads to the Senate, Chad?
Yes, but with a caveat, an asterisk. There is another procedural hurdle, something that's pretty rare, and we're just breaking this down right now, that they're going to have to go through. You're absolutely right. They passed the bill 273 to 147 here, but there was a motion made by Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, that's going to hold this up, and there's going to have to be another vote to kind of discharge this to get this over to the Senate. We don't see this very often. All that is a delaying tactic, but they have passed the bill. The bill is, in fact, passed, but they can't send it across to the Senate. Keep in mind that there is a deadline here in about a week and a half where the Senate has to sync up with the House, or the House has to align with the Senate to make sure that these programs don't go dark. But they have passed the bill today. 2-year reauthorization through 2026. John?
All right, so Kelly Ferris says that they have to take another vote next week on a motion to table on the motion to reconsider. Can you put that in English for us?
Reconsider is basically saying we're going to vote again, okay? And what you can do to euthanize that, to terminate that, is table it. That kills it. So we don't see that very often where somebody demands a roll call vote on that very arcane piece of parliamentary procedure. But basically, you hear this at the end of every roll call vote where they move to reconsider and then somebody says they move to table, and that's it. That didn't happen today, and that's the holdup that will delay it getting to the Senate, John.
You know, it would be very helpful if Google Translate would add congressional speak.
Yeah. So there you go. So Chad Pergram, about as good of a job as you could in explaining it. It at least puts the brakes on this thing. I'm not getting the impression that this will lead to the bill being killed next week. But if that does happen for some reason, then we've got the groundwork for it. Anna Paulina Luna, a young congresswoman, raising a very arcane tactic, apparently, in order to tap the brakes ever so lightly here. Let me take Tom in Bowie, line 2. Tom, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, I love your show. Vince,
Thank you, sir.
I'm a conspiracy theorist. I just speculate that they got him in the shift. They opened up the folder with all the information they had on him, and he probably came out ash white and shaken, and he changed his vote. That's the only thing I could think of.
Speaker Mike Johnson, you mean? Yeah, so Mike Johnson says, hey, there's all these abuses. They bring him behind closed doors in a classified briefing. He pops out and he goes, oh, I'm for government spying now.
Absolutely, because you know what Chuck Schumer said. They got 6 ways from Sunday of getting at you, so he doesn't want to be in that target.
You never know. You never know, and that's the unfortunate thing. Tom, thank you. That's all
right. Thanks, Vince.
That's a theory, and boy, if that's the case, man, we're in another world. Let's see. Leo's in Colorado, line 1. Leo, as always, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Good afternoon. You know, I got to remind the American people, whoever is listening, FISA stands for Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, not DISA, Domestic Intelligence Surveillance Act. That's what the FBI's to do, not our intelligence community. Okay? So for Congress to massively pass this warrantless thing is against everything our government stands for, our country, should I say, in the Constitution. Because under Title 18, as an intelligence professional, retired now, if we rolled up on a American voice for the linguists and so forth, and unless we detected another foreign voice, we had to roll on. We were not allowed to record it. This is when we were overseas, okay, 30-some years ago.
Yeah.
We're not allowed to do that. So for them to blanket, and say we're going to just target Americans goes against everything in this country. Between that and the bill that Biden's pushing through this week about confiscating guns, registering guns, and doing this and that with guns. In Colorado, they got a bill. They're doing the same thing. They're going to ban everything, technically, with a magazine. And I was in a sporting goods store yesterday, and I said, what's that going to do? And the sales guy goes, well, it's going to get rid of everything in here. And he says to include me because I'm not going to put up with it. But we got to stop this. The American people need to wake up. You need to start calling your congressmen and your senators and say, stop. You cannot do this. Cannot. Bold letters emphasize they're not allowed to spy on Americans. I mean, we've got the FBI that handles domestic issues. CIA handles foreign issues. We're starting to commingle these agencies and what they can do and what they can't do, and it's got to stop, Vince.
And they've abused these authorities hundreds of thousands of times, at least. I mean, and that's why we're talking about it at all. And at one point, Speaker Johnson recognized that, but apparently he's been consumed by the blob, unfortunately.
Well, they got dirt on him. I mean, nobody's cleansed in this environment. And the way they're mixing and matching and twisting things around, what's right is wrong and what's wrong is right. I mean, we're seeing it every day. Look at the news. It's everywhere, Vince. It's a plague that is just worse than locusts coming. I mean, I don't know how more I can say that.
But your advice, Leo, your advice is well taken, though, which is you've got to wear these guys out. You've got to get on the phone with them and get to their offices. And it's important, especially that you call the person who represents you, your district, and tell them exactly what's on your mind. Because if there's the one thing we have left that actually can work is public pressure. And my guess, honestly, this week is that the reason that it even was a tie vote today to try and get a warrant requirement in place is because the public pressure was rising. And Congress was beginning to feel it. And now we just have to get it over the top. That's the goal.
Yep, absolutely. And the quicker we do this, because it's an election year, and if this gets ramrodded through, it's going to be that much harder to overturn later on. Yep. So we got to act now. People, listen, please reach out to your representatives. Make an office visit. Go down to D.C. if you have the opportunity. Do it. We've got to do this now because we're about to go over that cliff, that precipice that we're not going to be able to recover. And it's going to be a sad day. You know, like I told Corey, I says, what's next? They're going to be teaching us Sieg Heil? I mean, seriously, where does it end, Vince?
Yeah, I ask myself that all the time. Leo, thank you as always. Good call as always, sir.
Vince. You too.
Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, David Strom will be with us. George Hill as well in the next hour. Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, is here at 5 o'clock. Daniel Turner's here at 5:30. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The Department of Justice this week announced that it will expand its power over the sale and transfer of guns all across the country. It's illegal for them to keep a gun registry, so they've been trying to figure out ways to track Americans and their gun ownership any other way they can. Here's Merrick Garland making the announcement this week.
Recently, ATF found that the flood of illegal guns into our communities is increasingly driven by individuals who sell guns without a license and who do not conduct background checks. Too often, these black market guns wind up in the hands of people who are not allowed to have them. Too often, these black market guns are found at crime scenes. And too often, these black market guns are responsible for heartbreaking tragedies. Today, the Justice Department is issuing one of the most significant gun regulations in decades. Pursuant to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the regulation expands the definition of who must obtain a license and conduct a background check before selling firearms. It will also close the gun show loophole. Under this regulation, it will not matter if guns are sold on the internet, at a gun show, or at a brick-and-mortar store. If you sell guns predominantly to earn a profit, you must be licensed and you must conduct background checks.
Once again, the so-called gun show loophole is a myth, but that doesn't stop Merrick Garland. Mark Smith is now here. He's the host of the Four Boxes Diner YouTube channel, also author of the book, First They Came for the Gun Owners. Mark, good to have you back with us. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Vince, for having me on. A lot to talk about. Merrick Garland, not only am I glad he is not on the United States Supreme Court because he's a partisan hack, I'm now excited because he also doesn't understand federal law, apparently, based on that statement you just played for the audience.
Yeah, they say they're recategorizing someone who is, quote, engaged in the business of selling guns. What does this mean to you? Just take it down to brass tacks for us.
Okay, the bottom line is this. If you're in the business of selling guns, you're required and have been required for decades to get a license. That license, Vince, is called a federal firearms license. Okay, if you're in the business, you're making money, you're making profits, it's your job, you got to get a license. Now, here's the key, and this is why I made the observation that Merrick Garland doesn't appear to understand the law. If you have an FFL, Vince, and you sell a gun, it doesn't matter where you sell the gun, at a gun show, in your house, in a store, on the street, in your car. If you have an FFL and you sell any gun, Vince, you have to run a background check. So the notion of a gun show loophole has never existed when it comes to gun dealers, because gun dealers always have to run a background check. And if you're in the business of selling guns, you have to get an FFL. So what are we talking about here with this proposed or this new rule? The answer is, at the end of the day, I think this is much ado about nothing, because it doesn't really change anything. The criminals who do not get their license, do not get their guns from FFLs, they get their guns on the black market. They are not going to subject themselves to a background check with anyone. So it's not going to impact criminals at all. And then think about this for 1 second, Vince. You've done a great job covering this story. On the one hand, you have this anti-gun Biden administration saying every day there's too many guns in America, there's too many gun dealers in America, and now today they tried to change the definition of gun dealer and brought it out to create more gun dealers in America. And again, it just goes to show you how they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. But the good news is I see it, even though I oppose all gun control-related laws in all respects as a general matter for violating the Second Amendment, the reality is I'm not sure if this is going to matter in the real world beyond the following. It's going to create additional confusion. And the only reason why that confusion is good for the Biden administration is what it allows them to tell the mainstream media that doesn't understand anything about guns or gun laws that they've closed some loophole that never existed, right? So it's a PR plan. The other thing, of course, is the confusion will make it harder for law-abiding Americans who want to comply with the law and get it right. It will create confusion for those people who just simply want to follow the law. And it will have no bearing whatsoever, no change whatsoever, Vince, on the criminals who are engaging in the violent thuggery and are not being put in prison by this administration.
You know, I hadn't contemplated one of the points that you made just a moment ago, which is now they have to lose the talking point that there's a gun show loophole. Oh, because Merrick Garland and Joe Biden closed it. How could there be a gun show loophole? They just closed it. Move on. But of course, they won't give up that talking point. It doesn't even matter. My question fundamentally, and I think you're kind of getting at it for me, is this toothless in the sense that the status quo continues? The same, everything's going to be the same. Or are they expanding the definition of who's engaged in gun sales so much that they're going to criminalize the private transfer of guns?
Well, I think what they really want to do is how to explain this, Vince. I don't think it's necessarily going to create additional criminal problems for ordinary Americans. What it's going to do is make people more uncomfortable in buying or selling guns with their neighbors or family members or whatever it is, or just disposing of a collection. It's
right.
going to create additional hurdles and confusion. And whenever that happens with ordinary middle-class Americans that want to follow the law, it makes them scared. And again, never forget that the purpose, one of the main goals of the anti-gun movement in America, and I write about this in First They Came from the Gun Owners, and I talk about this on my YouTube channel, The Four Boxes Diner, is they want to discourage a gun culture, a self-defense gun culture. And one of the ways you accomplish that, Vince, in my view, is you make everything about it hard to do. You make it hard to buy guns. You make it hard to sell guns. You make it hard to learn about guns. You make it hard to read magazines and watch YouTube videos about guns. This is the goal of the they just want to destroy America's longstanding gun culture. And this is just another attempt to do so by creating confusion in the marketplace where people don't know exactly what they need to do to comply with the law. And they get scared, and therefore they don't want to get involved. And that is exactly a big part of what the anti-gun movement wants to do, is make people scared from getting involved and protect themselves and exercising their Second Amendment rights in that Bill of Rights.
Yeah, I mean, and they're always trying to ban components of guns that, in fact, make guns more accurate, for instance, and thus safer to wield. and they'll try and ban those things and convince us that it's for our safety that they're banning the things that make guns more safe.
That's exactly right. I mean, they want to ban anything that makes guns more effective for law-abiding Americans, because anytime you make a gun, and think about this for a second, they say, well, we don't want to make guns more effective for the criminals. But again, we do not measure or evaluate constitutional rights by virtue of how some gangbanger can misbehave with it, right? We measure constitutional rights by how American citizens can exercise them lawfully. That's the focus, and that's what the Supreme Court jurisprudence says. You focus on how Mark and Vince exercise our, among other things, Second Amendment rights. We don't look to how criminals engage in them or how they can be misused. That's just not how the Constitution works. Now, if you misuse a gun, you defame someone, guess what? You can be sued. Go to prison. There's remedies for that if you abuse it. But you don't punish you don't punish Americans for the acts of other people.
It is illegal for the United States federal government to keep a gun registry of American citizens who own weapons. Yet I've noticed that every time a gun is used in the commission of a crime, within minutes, we typically get some sort of headline telling us where the gun was bought, who owned it, under what circumstances they purchased it. And I always see, whenever I see those headlines, I think, I thought they didn't keep a gun registry. I thought we weren't. How is it that they have all of this very granular data on of where this weapon was purchased and how it was used? And so what's the answer? Does the federal government keep a lot more data than they let on?
Well, yes, it is illegal for them to have a federal registry. And I think what we're confusing here is there are crime guns, which are guns that are used in crimes, and that's not to be confused with guns that are traced. If you look at certain states, they will trace any gun that comes into their possession. And then what they try to do is they try to pretend that whenever they're tracing a gun, they suggest that is a crime gun. But that's a sleight of hand that we see in the anti-gun media sometimes, where they try to confuse the mere fact that someone is tracing a gun, like law enforcement is tracing guns, with that it's a crime gun. But in many instances, law enforcement traces all guns, and usually those traces lead to literally nothing. Because if you think about it, you have a major manufacturer sells a gun to a major distributor, then sells it to a major, a retail store with an FFL. All of this is, all of these people have federal licenses to engage in this business. So then that FFL, it goes from the licensed manufacturer to a licensed distributor to a licensed retailer. Then that licensed retailer sells the gun to someone, and that has to clear a NICS check, because again, there is no background, that you have to be a background check if you're an FFL. Now that person has the gun. Now if that person or his family member or his friend or whatever it is goes out and breaks the law, well, again, even if you can trace it back to that first retailer or that distributor or to that manufacturer, it tells you nothing about whether a crime is committed. If someone misuses a gun, like if they misuse a baseball bat, finding out that they bought the gun or the baseball bat at some store, what does that do to solve crime? It literally does nothing. It tells you the chain of distribution legally, but what does it tell you about the crime? Absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all. Yet they keep all this data. So let me, I'm going to play some audio for you. This is, by now I'm certain you've heard this. This is a woman by the name of Lily Tang Williams. She is a survivor of Mao's China. And there was a debate earlier this week at Dartmouth that involved the gun control activist by the name of David Hogg. At the end, there was a Q&A, and this lovely woman stepped up to the microphone, and here's what she had to say to Mr. Hogg.
Hi, my name is Lily Tang Williams. Welcome to my live free or die state. Actually, I am a Chinese immigrant who survived communism. And under Mao, 40 million people were starving to death after he sold communism to them, and 20 million people died, murdered during his Cultural Revolution. So my question to you, David, is that can you guarantee me, a gun owner tonight, our government in the U.S., in D.C., will never become a tyrannical government? Can you guarantee that to me?
There's no way I can ever guarantee that any government will not be tyrannical.
Well, then the debate on gun control is over, because I will never give up my guns. Never. And you should go to China to see how gun control works for dictatorship of CCP.
Mark, have you ever heard it said so succinctly?
I think that was a perfect observation, and the U.S. Supreme Court recognizes, as did our founding fathers, that one of the greatest checks in preventing a government from going tyrannical is an armed population. As long as the population is armed, they cannot be readily converted from citizens into serfs or slaves. And that's why when the Supreme Court talks about these things in Heller, McDonald, and Bruin, they reference the fact that the reason why we have a Second Amendment and the whole Bill of Rights and the entire Constitution, of course, these are all anti-tyrannical efforts. The reason why our Constitution exists, not just the Second Amendment, but the whole Constitution, with checks and separation of powers, checks and balances, all these things that have been built in. These are safeguards to stop the government from going tyrannical. That does happen. Empires do fall. We may not think it will ever occur here, but if you say that, you are being naive and ignorant of history throughout time. There are many instances. There's countless examples of countries and governments that go haywire. Maybe they become tyrannical. Maybe they fall apart. Maybe you have massive civil disorder. All of this stuff was discussed by our founding fathers, including early Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, who wrote the early definitive work on the U.S. Constitution. He was important because Justice Story is the famous justice who wrote the Amistad decision that freed the African slaves that were captured by the Spaniards. And, of course, the Steven Spielberg movie Amistad was based in large part upon the work of Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, who thought that the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms was the palladium of liberty for a republic.
Right, and as you point out, tyranny is not the only awful conclusion for so many countries. It's also sometimes it's civilizational collapse, anarchy, also foreign invasion. I mean, how many of our adversaries have to factor into their calculus about whether or not they would invade America the reality that so many Americans are armed and ready to defend themselves?
And tyranny can go down to the street level. I mean, what I like to explain then is that the Second Amendment is about thwarting tyranny in all its forms. Now, that tyranny could be a street criminal coming up to you to hit you over the head. That places you in an act of war, right? You're in a position of war with someone that's trying to take your life. It could be a wild animal trying to attack you. It could be a gang. It could, and then it could be foreign invaders. It could be any of these things. Tyranny and evil comes in all sorts of guises and forms, and the Second Amendment is there. The right to self-defense is there, so you have an opportunity, an option at least, to try to fend and protect yourself against all forms of tyranny, whatever that tyranny manifests in. And that's what the Founding Fathers understood, and that's what they wrote about, and that's why we have a whole Constitution, including the right to keep and bear arms in the Second Amendment.
It can't be brought up enough, and I'm so glad you're doing it today and always. Mark Smith, constitutional attorney, host of the Four Boxes Diner YouTube channel, and the author of the book, First They Came for the Gun Owners. Sir, as always, thank you very much. Good to talk to you today. Yeah, nobody is better with handling guns and safer with guns than gun owners themselves. Gun culture, these are the people who are the most reverent towards the capacity of these tools. I was just at an indoor shooting range a couple weeks ago. We were shooting an AR-15, a Daniel Defense AR. It was really, really nice. And I was shooting well with it. And then a Glock 19. I was doing better with the AR than I was with the Glock 19. But one of the things that I always notice when I'm at these gun ranges is that everyone who's there is hyper concerned about the safety. They're all over it. They know exactly what they're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, there's always somebody there who can help you, and they teach you. We had one guy who was with us who opened up his case a little bit away from his own shooting bay in order to bring his weapon out, and the range safety officer stops him and says, no, you got to open up the weapon inside the bay itself, the barrel pointing downrange. They are great at it. So just the attention to safety is essential there. And again, nobody's better with these guns and has a better understanding and a better respect for them than the people who own them. That's what I've always encountered. Let's see. I've got Mark in Landover Hills calling in line 2. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm good, sir.
Buddy, I've called you and was talking to Corey about this, and you're talking about I caught you in one of my wheelhouses is firearms. And yeah. I will tell you that you and Mark were 100% correct in everything that you said. And the most stark thing about this, Vince, was talking about the tracing of firearms. And they keep doing it over and over and keep talking the same invalid points over and over. And man, if you keep doing that with no result or not educating yourself, that says that you're one of those 3 words that they classify people in of being mentally incompetent, an imbecile. a nincompoop, or in this case, a moron. That is the definition of a moron. People should not act like that, Vince. And a lot of them are really intelligent people, but what it is they let their mind play tricks on them. Rather than thinking clearly, they think irrationally like a little child because they have to have everything in their way, Vince. And that's not the way they should be.
That's a shame. We've got too many of those intelligent morons running around. Mark, thank you. Yeah, he's right. He's right. There's a lot of stupidity out there. One of the goals of this show is to put an end to stupidity. Coming up, we'll be joined by George Hill, the FBI whistleblower. He'll talk about the government spying powers renewed today